Welcome back. Today, we're tackling one of the absolute cornerstones of the UK building regulations, Approved Document A. This is the one that's all about structural safety. Basically, it's the rule book for making sure the buildings around us are built to last. So, what is this document really for? Well, you can think of it as the official guide that takes all that complex, high-level engineering theory and boils it down into practical, hands-on rules for the people actually doing the work, the architects, the builders, and the engineers on site. All right, so here's how we're going to break this down. We're going to look at the regulations as answers to some really big structural questions. We'll cover the three main requirements, A1, A2, and A3, and then we'll get into some of the nitty-gritty practical rules you'll find in the document itself. Okay, let's start with the most fundamental question of all, right? What actually holds a building up against everything that's thrown at it? From its own weight to howling winds.
The answer to that is requirement A1. This one is all about the overall stability of the structure. And the smart thing is, it doesn't try to reinvent the wheel. It points designers directly to established, proven engineering standards, like the BSEN Eurocodes, to make sure all the calculations are spot on and the final building is completely robust.
But here's the thing. A perfectly stable building isn't much good if the ground it's sitting on decides to shift. And that brings us to the next major problem these regulations have to solve. And this is where requirement A2 steps in. It tackles this problem head-on with a laser focus on foundations. The whole point is to ensure the building can handle whatever the ground throws at it. Whether that's clay soil swelling up after heavy rain or the ground freezing and expanding in winter, all without damaging the building's structure. Now, for something a bit more dramatic, but absolutely critical. Let's say one single part of a building fails, maybe because of an accident. Could that one failure start a chain reaction and bring the whole thing down like a house of cards? Well, to prevent that exact nightmare scenario, we have requirement A3. It deals with something called disproportionate collapse. The key word there is disproportionate. The whole idea is containment. A small local accident should only cause small local damage. It should never, ever lead to a catastrophic widespread collapse.
And here's a really important detail. This rule didn't always cover every building. It used to only apply to buildings that were over 5 stories tall. But back in 2013, a huge amendment changed that. Now, this vital safety net applies to all buildings, from a little single-story extension to a massive skyscraper.
So we've got these big, high-level principles. But how do they actually translate into the day-to-day work of building something? Let's look at a few practical examples for things like walls and openings. This is where the document gets really specific. Take wall thickness, for example. It gives you these clear, simple rules. And this is a perfect illustration of how the regulations adapt. For a standard brick wall, there's one rule. But for something like an uncoarse stone wall with all its regular shapes, it needs to be quite a bit thicker to provide that same level of safety and stability. Makes perfect sense. The guide also gives you a straight-up list of approved materials you can actually use for structural masonry. This takes the guesswork out of it and ensures that the very building blocks of the structure, from simple clay bricks to beautiful natural stone, all meet a certain quality standard. But it goes even deeper than that. It's not just what material you use, but how you use it. The document specifies the minimum strength that material needs to have depending on its use condition, which could relate to things like how exposed it is to the weather or how much load it's carrying. So you use a stronger brick where you need more strength. It's all about putting the right material in the right place. And what if you're thinking about putting in a new window or maybe knocking a doorway through a wall? Yep, Approved Document A has very clear rules for that too. There are strict limits on how big an opening can be and where you can put it in a load-bearing wall, all to make sure that wall stays strong enough to do its job. So, after all these requirements, these tables, these very specific diagrams and rules, what's the big picture? What's the whole point of Approved Document A? Ultimately, it really just comes down to one thing. Our safety. Approved Document A is the crucial framework that takes incredibly complex engineering and turns it into a set of practical, understandable rules. It's what makes sure our homes, our workplaces, our garages, everything are built to be safe and stand the test of time. Of course, having a strong structure is just the first step. A truly safe building also needs to handle things like the risk of fire, moisture getting in, or even sound traveling between rooms. And luckily, each of those hazards has its own dedicated approved document, which we'll be sure to explore another time.